In a small, quiet town surrounded by rolling hills and thick woods, there lived a woman who had learned to face life's hardest challenges with a brave heart. She was a single mother, trying her best to raise her spirited young son, who was just 8 years old. Life wasn't easy for her. She worked long hours as a waitress at the local diner, juggling bills, school runs, and the constant judgmental stares from people around her. Being an unwed mother in such a tight-knit community came with its own set of struggles. People whispered behind her back, questioning her choices and labeling her as someone who didn't fit into their idea of proper. But she never let it break her spirit. Every day, she woke up determined to give her son a better future, even if it meant working harder than anyone else. One sunny Saturday morning, something unusual happened. Her childhood friend, someone she hadn't seen in years, sent her an invitation to her wedding. The ceremony was going to take place at St. Mary's Church, a grand old building made of stone that stood proudly in the middle of the town. It was one of those places where everyone seemed to know everyone, and events like weddings were always big deals. Excited, yet nervous, she decided to attend. After all, this was her friend's special day, and she wanted to show her support. She dressed up nicely, wearing a simple but elegant dress she had saved for occasions like this. Her son, full of energy and curiosity, tagged along, holding her hand tightly as they walked toward the church. As they stepped inside, she felt dozens of eyes on them. Some glanced at her briefly before turning away, while others stared longer than necessary. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating. Whispers started floating through the pews, soft enough not to be heard directly, but loud enough to make their meaning clear. Why is she here? She shouldn't have come. What kind of example is she setting for her kid? Each word hit her like a tiny pinprick, slowly adding up until it felt unbearable. Still, she held her head high, reminding herself why she had come. To celebrate her friend's happiness, not to dwell on what others thought of her. She found a seat near the back, away from most of the crowd, hoping to blend into the background. Her son sat quietly beside her, sensing her unease without fully understanding it. The ceremony began, and for a while, the beauty of the moment distracted her. The music played softly, the vows were exchanged, and the couple looked radiant as they promised to spend their lives together. For those few minutes, she forgot about the whispers and the judgmental looks. But as the ceremony ended and guests lined up to congratulate the newlyweds, things took a turn. A tall man in a dark suit approached her. It was Pastor Lewis, the head of the church, known for his stern demeanor and rigid views. His presence alone commanded attention, and when he stopped in front of her, she immediately felt a knot form in her stomach. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable but intimidating nonetheless. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice firm and devoid of warmth, "but I must ask you to leave. You are not welcome here." Her heart sank. She blinked, unsure if she'd heard him correctly. "What do you mean?" she managed to ask, her voice trembling slightly. "You know very well what I mean," he replied, his tone cold. "Your situation does not align with the values we uphold in this house of God. We cannot condone your presence here." Every eye in the room turned to look at her. Some faces showed pity, others disgust, and a few remained indifferent. The weight of their collective judgment pressed down on her shoulders, making it hard to breathe. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of these people. Grabbing her son's hand, she quickly stood up and hurried out of the church, leaving behind not just the celebration, but also pieces of her dignity. Outside, the fresh air did little to ease the sting of humiliation. Her son, confused and worried, looked up at her. "Mom, why are we leaving?" he asked innocently. She forced a smile, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. "It's okay, sweetheart," she said, though her voice cracked. "We'll go home now." As they walked down the street, she couldn't help but replay the pastor's words in her mind. Was she really that unworthy? Had she done something so terrible that she deserved to be treated this way? These thoughts swirled in her head, mixing with anger, sadness, and frustration. Yet, amidst all the chaos, a spark of defiance flickered within her. She reminded herself that she was more than the labels people gave her. She was a mother, a worker, a fighter, and no amount of rejection could take that away from her. Little did she know, this painful moment would soon lead to an unexpected encounter, one that would change her life forever. The walk home felt endless. Each step seemed heavier than the last, as if the weight of the world had settled on her shoulders. Her son walked silently beside her, his small hand clutching hers tightly. He didn't say much, but she could tell he was confused. His wide, curious eyes kept glancing up at her, searching for answers she wasn't ready to give. The streets were quiet, save for the occasional chirping of birds and the distant hum of cars passing by. She tried to focus on the rhythm of their footsteps, anything to distract herself from the storm brewing inside her. Just as they reached the edge of town, a sleek black car slowed down beside them. For a moment she hesitated, unsure whether to keep walking or acknowledge the vehicle. Then, the window rolled down, revealing a man in his late 40s. He had sharp features softened by warm, kind eyes that seemed to hold a lifetime of stories. His presence was calm, almost reassuring despite the luxury of the car he drove. "Excuse me," he said, his voice smooth and polite. "Are you all right? I noticed you leaving the church earlier and it looked like something wasn't right." She stopped in her tracks, taken aback by his sudden appearance. Was he another judgmental face, someone who wanted to lecture her about what had happened? Or was he genuinely concerned? After a brief pause, she decided to answer honestly. "I'm fine," she replied, though her tone betrayed the lie. "It's nothing important." The man studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "If you don't mind me saying, you don't look fine, and neither does your boy." He gestured toward the child standing quietly beside her. "I'd like to help if I can." Her defenses went up instantly. Help? From a stranger? She'd learned over the years not to trust offers of assistance too easily. People often came with hidden agendas, expecting something in return. But there was something about this man. His sincerity, perhaps, or the way he spoke without any trace of condescension, that made her hesitate. "What do you want?" she asked bluntly, her guard still firmly in place. He smiled faintly, as if he understood her suspicion. "Nothing," he said simply. "I saw what happened back there, and I thought maybe you could use a ride home. That's all." For a second, she considered refusing. Walking would take longer, sure, but at least it gave her time to think, to process everything that had just transpired. On the other hand, her feet ached, her son looked tired, and the thought of sitting in a comfortable car, even for just a short while, was tempting. Finally, after a long pause, she nodded. "Okay," she said cautiously. "Thank you." They climbed into the car, the leather seats cool against their skin. As they pulled away from the curb, the man introduced himself. "My name's James," he said, glancing at her through the rearview mirror. "And you are?" She hesitated again before answering. "I'm just someone trying to get through the day." James chuckled softly, a sound that carried no malice. "Fair enough, no pressure, but if you ever feel like talking, I'm here to listen." At first, she stayed silent, unsure of how much to share. This man was practically a stranger after all. What did he care about her struggles? Yet as the minutes passed and the car moved further away from the church, something inside her began to loosen. Maybe it was the kindness in his voice, or maybe it was the exhaustion finally catching up with her. Whatever it was, she found herself speaking, her words tumbling out faster than she intended. "It's not easy," she admitted, staring out the window. "Being a single mom, I mean. Everyone has opinions about how I should live my life, even though they don't know anything about me. Today was just another reminder of how some people see me, as someone who doesn't belong." James listened intently, his gaze steady on the road ahead. When she paused, he didn't rush to fill the silence. Instead, he waited patiently for her to continue. "And my son," she added, glancing at the boy sitting quietly beside her. "He deserves better." He shouldn't have to grow up feeling like we're less than everyone else. But sometimes it feels like no matter how hard I try, it's never enough. Her voice cracked slightly and she quickly looked away, embarrassed by the emotion threatening to spill over. James didn't push her to elaborate. Instead, he offered a simple, heartfelt response. "You're stronger than you think," he said, gently. "And your son is lucky to have you. Don't let anyone make you believe otherwise." Those words hit her like a wave, washing away some of the bitterness she'd been carrying. It wasn't just the sentiment, it was the conviction behind it. The belief that someone outside her immediate circle actually cared. They sat in silence for a while after that, the hum of the engine filling the space between them. When they finally arrived at her modest apartment building, she turned to thank him, only to find him already stepping out of the car to open the door for her. "No need to thank me," he said when she started to speak. "But if you ever need anything at all, don't hesitate to reach out. Here's my card." He handed her a small business card with his name and number printed neatly on it. She took it, unsure of what to say. Before she could respond, he gave her a reassuring smile and returned to his car. As he drove off, she stood there for a moment, watching the taillights disappear into the distance. That night, as she tucked her son into bed, she couldn't stop thinking about the encounter. Who was this man? And why had he gone out of his way to help her? Part of her wondered if it was too good to be true, if there was some catch she hadn't seen yet. But another part of her, the part that had been yearning for a little hope, dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, things were about to change. As she drifted off to sleep, the card rested on her bedside table, a tiny symbol of possibility in an otherwise overwhelming world. Over the next few weeks, life began to shift in small but noticeable ways. The businessman, James, didn't just disappear after that day. Instead, he started showing up unexpectedly, always with a smile and an air of genuine interest. At first, she was hesitant, unsure of what to make of his frequent visits. Was he simply being kind, or was there something more to it? But as time went on, her doubts slowly faded. James wasn't pushy or intrusive. He simply showed up when she least expected it, bringing little gestures of support that felt meaningful without being overwhelming. One afternoon, for instance, he stopped by the diner where she worked. She was surprised to see him sitting at a corner table, sipping coffee and reading a newspaper like any other customer. When their eyes met, he waved her over casually, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "How's your day going?" he asked warmly, folding the paper and setting it aside. "It's busy," she admitted, glancing around at the bustling tables. "But I'm managing." He nodded thoughtfully, then said something that caught her off guard. "You know, you shouldn't have to manage everything alone. There are people who want to help. You just have to let them." She raised an eyebrow, half amused and half skeptical. "And what does that mean exactly?" James leaned back in his chair, his expression softening. "It means I've been thinking about our conversation the other day, about how hard you work, how much you sacrifice for your son. You deserve more than this. Everyone deserves a chance to build the life they dream of." Her defenses went up again, though not as strongly as before. "I appreciate that," she said carefully, "but I don't need charity. I can handle things on my own." "I'm not offering charity," James replied firmly. "I'm offering opportunity. Tell me, what's one thing you've always wanted to do but haven't had the chance to pursue?" The question caught her off guard. For years, she'd buried her dreams under layers of responsibility, telling herself they weren't practical or realistic. But now, faced with someone who genuinely seemed to care, she found herself hesitating. Finally, she sighed and looked away. "I used to dream of becoming a nurse," she confessed quietly. "Helping people, making a difference, but it's not easy when you're juggling 2 jobs and raising a kid." James didn't miss a beat. "Why hasn't anyone told you that it's possible? Sure, it won't be easy, but nothing worth doing ever is. What if I helped you get started? Paid for your tuition, maybe even found a way to adjust your schedule so you could take classes?" Her heart skipped a beat. It sounded too good to be true, almost like a trap. Yet looking into his eyes, she saw no ulterior motive, only sincerity. Still, pride held her back. Accepting such a gift felt monumental, like admitting defeat or dependency. Sensing her hesitation, James added, "Think of it as an investment. Not in you as a person who needs help, but in someone who has untapped potential. Someone who could inspire others someday." That night, lying awake in bed, she replayed the conversation over and over in her mind. Could she really do this? Could she step out of her comfort zone and chase a dream she'd long since given up on? More importantly, could she trust James enough to let him help her? The questions swirled in her head until exhaustion finally pulled her into sleep. Meanwhile, James also made an effort to connect with her son. One Saturday morning, he arrived at their apartment carrying a chessboard and a bag of pastries. The boy, curious and slightly shy, watched from behind the door as James greeted his mother. "Got something for your young man here," James said cheerfully, holding up the board. "Ever played chess?" The boy shook his head, but his eyes lit up with intrigue. Within minutes, the two were seated at the kitchen table, James patiently explaining the rules while the boy listened intently. Over the next hour, laughter filled the room as they moved pieces across the board, the boy growing more confident with each turn. Watching them interact, she felt a pang of gratitude, and something else, something deeper that she couldn't quite name. As the weeks passed, these moments became routine. James would visit regularly, sometimes bringing books or puzzles for the boy, other times sharing stories about his own childhood. He spoke openly about the challenges he'd faced, growing up, the loneliness, the struggles with self-doubt, and how he'd overcome them through perseverance and the kindness of strangers. These conversations resonated deeply with her, reinforcing the idea that everyone carries burdens. But resilience often lies in finding the right support system. Slowly, her perspective began to shift. For so long, she'd carried the weight of judgment and rejection alone, believing that asking for help was a sign of weakness. But James challenged that notion, showing her that leaning on others didn't diminish her strength. It amplified it. With his encouragement, she decided to take the leap and enroll in nursing school. It wasn't an easy decision, and the fear of failure lingered in the back of her mind. But she reminded herself of what James had said. "You're capable of far more than you realize." On the day she submitted her application, she called James to share the news. His reaction was immediate and heartfelt. "I'm proud of you," he said simply, his voice brimming with emotion. "This is just the beginning." As the months rolled on, the bond between them deepened. Their interactions evolved from polite exchanges to genuine connection, rooted in mutual respect and understanding. James continued to play a supportive role in her life, cheering her on during late-night study sessions and celebrating her small victories along the way. And yet, despite his generosity, he never crossed the line into overstepping. He respected her boundaries, allowing her to maintain her independence while offering guidance whenever she needed it. For her part, she found herself opening up in ways she hadn't thought possible. She shared stories about her past, her fears, her hopes for the future, all things she'd kept bottled up for years. In return, James listened without judgment, offering advice only when asked. There was a comfort in knowing she could be vulnerable. Around him, a sense of safety she hadn't experienced in a long time. Even the townsfolk began to notice the change. Word spread quickly about James's involvement in her life, sparking a mix of curiosity and gossip. Some praised his kindness, while others whispered about ulterior motives. But neither of them paid much attention to the chatter. What mattered most was the growing trust and camaraderie between them, a foundation built on honesty, empathy, and shared humanity. By the time her first semester of nursing school began, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a different future, one where she wasn't defined by her circumstances, but by her determination to rise above them. And standing beside her every step of the way was James, a man who had entered her life unexpectedly but whose presence had become invaluable. Word of James's involvement in her life spread quickly through the small town, like ripples in a pond after a stone is thrown. People talked, some with admiration, others with suspicion. Whispers about their relationship reached the ears of Pastor Lewis and other members of St. Mary's congregation. To them, it was more than just a wealthy man helping a struggling single mother. It was a disruption to the social order they had worked so hard to maintain. In their eyes, James's actions were not only unconventional, but also morally questionable. How dare he associate with someone they deemed unworthy? Didn't he understand the standards of their community? Furious at what they saw as interference, the church leaders called an emergency meeting to discuss the matter. They gathered, in the church's dimly lit basement, sitting around a long wooden table that creaked under the weight of judgmental stares and folded arms. The air was thick with tension as Pastor Lewis stood at the head of the table, his face stern. "We cannot allow this to continue," he declared, slamming his fist on the table for emphasis. "It sets a dangerous precedent. If we condone such behavior, what message are we sending to the rest of the congregation?" The room erupted into murmurs of agreement. One elderly woman chimed in, her voice sharp and accusatory. "He's encouraging sin. What kind of example does that set for our children?" Another man added, "And who does he think he is, coming into our town and undermining our values?" Their outrage grew louder, feeding off each other's indignation. But unbeknownst to them, James had caught wind of the meeting. Determined to defend her honor and to challenge their narrow-mindedness, he decided to attend uninvited. He walked into the church that evening, his presence commanding immediate attention. Every eye turned toward him as he strode confidently into the room, his expression calm but resolute. "Good evening," he began, his voice steady and clear. "I couldn't help but hear about your little gathering. Thought I'd join the discussion." Pastor Lewis frowned, clearly displeased by the intrusion. "This is a private meeting," he said curtly. "Your presence here is neither welcome nor necessary." James raised an eyebrow, unfazed by the pastor's tone. "Private or not, you're discussing someone I care deeply about. So yes, my presence is necessary." The room fell silent, the tension palpable. James took a step forward, his gaze sweeping across the faces before him. Some looked defiant, others uneasy, but none dared to interrupt. He continued, his words deliberate and measured. "I've heard your concerns," he said, "and I understand why some of you might feel uncomfortable. Change often makes people uneasy. But let me ask you something. What exactly are you afraid of? Are you afraid that showing compassion might somehow weaken your moral standing? Or are you simply unwilling to see beyond your own biases?" His question hung in the air, unanswered. No one spoke, though several shifted uncomfortably in their seats. James pressed on, his voice rising slightly with conviction. "The woman you've judged so harshly has worked harder than most of you will ever know. She wakes up every day determined to give her son a better future, despite the obstacles stacked against her. And yet instead of offering support, you've chosen to ostracize her, to make her feel like she doesn't belong. Tell me, how is that aligning with the teachings of love and forgiveness you claim to uphold?" A few heads bowed, unable to meet his piercing gaze. Others exchanged nervous glances, unsure of how to respond. Sensing their discomfort, James softened, his tone slightly, though his message remained firm. "I'm not asking you to agree with everything she's done," he continued, "but I'm asking you to consider whether your actions reflect the values you preach. If you truly believe in redemption and second chances, then prove it, not with words, but with deeds. Show her the same grace you'd want for yourselves." The IBC room remained silent for several moments after he finished speaking. Finally, Pastor Lewis cleared his throat, his face flushed with a mix of anger and embarrassment. "Your perspective is appreciated," he muttered stiffly, though it was clear he didn't mean it. "But this is a matter for the church to decide." James nodded, knowing full well that he wouldn't change everyone's minds overnight. Still, he felt a sense of satisfaction as he left the room, aware that his words had planted seeds of doubt in some hearts. Perhaps not all of them would come around, but even a small shift in perspective could make a difference. Back at home, she sat nervously on the couch, waiting for James to return. When he walked through the door, she could tell immediately that something significant had happened. His usual calm demeanor was tinged with intensity, and there was a fire in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "What did you do?" she asked cautiously, bracing herself for the worst. James smiled faintly, sinking onto the couch beside her. "Let's just say I gave them something to think about." She listened intently as he recounted the events of the evening, the heated arguments, the defensive posturing, and ultimately, his impassioned plea for compassion. By the time he finished, tears were streaming down her face. Not tears of sadness, but of relief and gratitude. For years, she'd carried the weight of rejection alone, believing that she was destined to remain an outsider. But now, someone had stood up for her, not because he pitied her, but because he believed in her worth. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You risked so much." "I didn't risk anything," he replied firmly. "Standing up for what's right isn't a risk, it's a responsibility. And besides, no one should have to face that kind of judgment alone." Her heart swelled. With emotion, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a different future, one where she wasn't defined by the opinions of others. With James by her side, she felt a newfound courage bubbling within her. She realized that she didn't need to shrink herself to fit into someone else's mold. She could stand tall, embrace her journey, and inspire others to do the same. Over the following days, the impact of James's intervention became evident. While some townsfolk remained steadfast in their disapproval, others began to soften. A few even approached her directly, offering apologies or words of encouragement. It wasn't a complete turnaround, but it was progress, and that was enough for now. As she prepared for another busy week juggling work, school, and parenting, she found herself reflecting on how far she'd come. The road ahead was still uncertain, filled with challenges and hurdles yet to overcome. But for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. Hopeful not just for herself, but for the possibility of change. For her son, for the community, and for anyone else who had ever been made to feel unworthy. And standing beside her, ready to face whatever came next, was James. Together, they were proving that kindness and resilience could break down even the strongest walls. With James's unwavering support, her life began to transform in ways she never thought possible. Nursing school was no walk in the park. Balancing late-night study sessions with early morning shifts at the diner and caring for her son required every ounce of energy she had. Some days felt like an uphill battle, leaving her exhausted and questioning whether she could keep going. But then there were moments that reminded her why she had started this journey in the first place. The joy of acing a difficult exam, the satisfaction of mastering a new skill, or simply seeing the pride in her son's eyes when he heard about her progress. James continued to play a vital role during this time, always finding ways to lighten her load. He helped her create a schedule that allowed her to manage her responsibilities without burning out. On particularly tough days, he'd surprise her with coffee or a quick phone call just to check in and remind her that she wasn't alone. His encouragement became a steady anchor, keeping her grounded when self-doubt threatened to pull her under. Their bond deepened as they spent more time together. What began as a friendship rooted in mutual respect gradually evolved into something stronger. She found herself looking forward to their conversations, cherishing the laughter they shared and the quiet moments when words weren't even necessary. For his part, James seemed equally smitten. He spoke often about how much he admired her resilience and determination, qualities he said he rarely saw in others. But despite the growing connection between them, both remained cautious. Neither wanted to rush into anything or risk damaging the trust they had built. They took things slowly, savoring each step of their relationship rather than rushing toward some undefined finish line. Even so, it was impossible to ignore the chemistry that sparked whenever they were together. Her son noticed too, warming up to James in ways that melted her heart. The two would spend hours playing chess, building model airplanes, or talking about books and movies. Watching them interact, she couldn't help but feel a sense of completeness, a family forming before her very eyes. 2 years passed in what felt like both the blink of an eye and an eternity. Through sleepless nights and countless sacrifices, she persevered, driven by the dream of becoming a nurse. When graduation day finally arrived, she stood among her classmates, her cap and gown feeling surreal against her skin. As she walked across the stage to receive her diploma, applause erupted from the audience. Among the sea of faces, she spotted James sitting near the front, clapping enthusiastically with tears glistening in his eyes. Beside him sat her son, beaming with pride and holding a handmade sign that read, "We're so proud of you." The moment was overwhelming. Emotions flooded. Her chest, gratitude, relief, joy, all swirling together in a tide she could barely contain. After the ceremony, James approached her with a bouquet of flowers and a wide smile. "You did it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I always knew you would." She hugged him tightly, letting the weight of the past 2 years wash away. In that embrace, it wasn't just her accomplishment, it was theirs. Without his belief in her, she might never have taken the leap. And now, standing here as a graduate, she realized how much she owed not only to herself but also to the people who had stood by her side. To celebrate, James threw her a small party at a local restaurant. Friends, co-workers, and a few neighbors came to congratulate her, many of whom had once judged her harshly. Their presence struck her, not because it signaled forgiveness, but because it showed how far she had come. People who had once turned their backs were now celebrating her success, proof that change was possible even in the most stubborn hearts. Amidst the celebrations, James surprised her with another gesture that left her speechless. He arranged for a special event to take place at St. Mary's Church, the very same church where she had been humiliated years earlier. At first she hesitated, unsure if returning to that place was a good idea, but James reassured her, explaining that this time would be different. "This isn't about them," he said gently. "It's about you reclaiming your space, showing everyone, including yourself, that you belong wherever you choose to be." The evening of the event, she stepped into the church feeling a mix of nerves and excitement. The atmosphere was warm and welcoming, a stark contrast to the cold judgment she had faced before. Many of the townsfolk who had once shunned her were now gathered inside, smiling and chatting as if the past had been erased. Pastor Lewis was notably absent, but she didn't dwell on it. This night wasn't about him, it was about her triumph. As guests mingled, James stood beside her, holding her hand firmly. Together they greeted well-wishers, accepting congratulations and sharing stories of her journey. Her son darted around the room, proudly showing off his handmade sign to anyone who would listen. The sight filled her with a profound sense of peace. For so long, she had carried the burden of rejection, believing she didn't deserve happiness or acceptance. Now, surrounded by people who celebrated her achievements, she understood that she had earned every bit of this moment. Midway through the evening, James took the microphone to say a few words. The room fell silent as he began to speak, his voice steady and heartfelt. "Tonight, we're here to honor someone who has shown us all what true strength looks like," he said, his gaze locking onto hers. "She's faced challenges that would break most people, yet she never gave up. She fought for her dreams, for her son, and for the chance to prove that she is more than the labels others tried to put on her. And tonight, I think it's safe to say she's succeeded." Applause erupted, filling the church with warmth and affirmation. Tears streamed down her face as she absorbed the magnitude of the moment. This wasn't just a celebration of her accomplishments, it was a testament to the power of resilience, love, and second chances. In the weeks that followed, she decided to give back to the community that had once rejected her. Drawing inspiration from her own experiences, she began volunteering at St. Mary's Church as a counselor for young women facing similar struggles. She listened to their stories, offering guidance and encouragement while reminding them that they weren't alone. Her journey became a beacon of hope, proving that redemption was possible even in the unlikeliest places. And as for James, their relationship continued to flourish. They dated cautiously at first, mindful of the scrutiny they might still face. But over time, their connection grew deeper, evolving into a partnership rooted in love, trust, and mutual respect. On crisp autumn afternoon, surrounded by friends, family, and newfound allies, they exchanged vows in the very church that had once rejected her. Her son stood proudly by their side, a living reminder of the strength and resilience that had brought them all together. As the congregation applauded, she reflected on how far she had come, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. Life hadn't been easy, but it had taught her invaluable lessons about perseverance, forgiveness, and the transformative power of kindness. With James by her side and her son cheering her on, she stepped into the future with hope and confidence, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The months following the wedding were a whirlwind of new beginnings and unexpected joys. Life had taken a turn she could never have predicted when she first walked out of St. Mary's Church all those years ago, humiliated and broken. Now, standing in that same church as a bride, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about her, felt like a dream come true. But it wasn't just about her personal happiness. It was about the ripple effect her journey had created in the lives of others. Her decision to volunteer at the church as a counselor quickly became one of the most fulfilling parts of her life. At first, she worried that some might still see her as unfit for such a role, given her past. But instead, she found herself embraced not only by the young women she counseled, but also by many members of the congregation who admired her courage. They saw her as proof that change was possible, that no matter how far someone fell or how harshly they were judged, there was always hope for redemption. Each week, she met with different women, listening to their stories and offering guidance based on her own experiences. Some were single mothers struggling to make ends meet. Others were teenagers grappling with unplanned pregnancies. Each story tugged at her heartstrings, reminding her of the loneliness and fear she had once felt. She made it her mission to ensure that none of them walked away feeling like they didn't belong. One particular story stood out: a young woman named Lisa, barely 18, who came to her in tears after being kicked out of her family home. Her parents, devout churchgoers, couldn't accept her mistake, leaving her alone and scared. When Lisa arrived at the church seeking help, she hesitated to even step inside, convinced she wouldn't be welcomed. But when she saw the warm smile and open arms waiting for her, something shifted. Over time, Lisa began to trust again, finding strength in the idea that she wasn't defined by her circumstances. Watching Lisa grow stronger reminded her of her own journey, the moments of despair, the small victories, and ultimately, the realization that she was worthy of love and respect. It filled her with pride to know that she was helping others rewrite their narratives, just as James had helped her do years earlier. James, too, underwent a transformation through this shared experience. For much of his life, he had been driven by success, building companies, accumulating wealth, and climbing the ladder of achievement. But somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of what truly mattered. Meeting her and her son had awakened something within him, a desire to use his resources and influence not just for profit but for purpose. He began dedicating more time to charitable work, partnering with local organizations to support struggling families and provide scholarships for students pursuing careers in healthcare. Their partnership extended beyond their personal relationship. Together, they became a force for good in the community, inspiring others to rethink their assumptions and embrace compassion over judgment. People started referring to them as the couple who changed the town, though neither of them sought recognition. To them, it was simply about doing what felt right. As the seasons changed, so did the dynamics of their little family. Her son, now 10 years old, thrived under James's guidance. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day, built on mutual respect and shared interests. Chess games turned into science experiments, and bedtime stories evolved into discussions about history and philosophy. Watching her son flourish under James's care brought her immense joy. It was clear that he saw her boy not as a responsibility, but as a cherished part of his life. On weekends, the three of them often took trips together, exploring nearby parks, visiting museums, or simply enjoying picnics by the lake. These outings weren't extravagant, but they were filled with laughter and connection. For her son, having a father figure like James meant the world. And for James, stepping into that role gave him a sense of fulfillment he hadn't realized he was missing. Life wasn't without its challenges, of course. There were still days when old wounds resurfaced, triggered by a stray comment or an unkind glance. The road to acceptance wasn't smooth, and some people remained resistant to change. But she had learned to let those moments roll off her back, focusing instead on the progress she and her family had made. With James by her side, she felt equipped to handle whatever came their way. Their marriage became a testament to the power of teamwork. They supported each other through thick and thin, celebrating successes and navigating setbacks together. Whether it was juggling work schedules, managing household responsibilities, or planning for the future, they approached every challenge as a united front. Their love wasn't perfect. It was real, messy, and deeply human, but it was strong enough to weather any storm. Years later, as she stood before a group of young women at the church, sharing her story during a community event, she reflected on how far she had come. The room was packed, filled with faces eager to hear her words. She spoke candidly about her struggles, the rejection, the judgment, the moments when giving up seemed easier than pushing forward. But she also spoke about the turning points, the kindness of a stranger, the courage to pursue her dreams, and the unwavering belief that she deserved better. "I'm not here to tell you that life will be easy," she said, her voice steady and sincere. "It won't. There will be days when the weight feels unbearable, when the world seems determined to push you down. But I'm here to tell you that you are stronger than you think. You are capable of more than you realize. And most importantly, you are worthy of love, respect, and happiness." The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing through the church like a symphony of hope. As she stepped down from the podium, James greeted her with a proud smile, pulling her into a tight hug. Her son, now a teenager, stood nearby, clapping enthusiastically. In that moment, surrounded by the people she loved and the community she had helped transform, she felt truly at peace. Looking back, she realized that her journey wasn't just about overcoming adversity. It was about becoming someone who could inspire others to do the same. From the single mother rejected by her community to the nurse, wife, and advocate standing tall in the same space, her story was proof that second chances were possible. Redemption wasn't just a concept reserved for fairy tales. It was a choice, a mindset, and sometimes a leap of faith. And as she walked out of the church hand in hand with James and her son, she knew one thing for certain. No matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, with resilience, love, and the unshakable belief that brighter days were always within reach.